All right. Thanks for everybody for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and get things moving. So I know people will continue to roll in, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for Bob to give his talk. I am delighted today to welcome you to the inaugural talk in the Cialdini Leap Forward Colloquium series in Translational Social Psychology. The goal of this new series, which we hope will play out over the next 2 to 3 years, possibly longer, is to honor and carry forward Bob's very rich legacy of social psychological science that's richly integrated into real life, with rigorous theories that are influenced by real-world experience, empirical research that is not just conceptualized, but conducted in collaboration with community partners, and giving back lessons from this work to the community. Our speakers, we have 4 of them lined up so far over the next couple of years, and we will continue to add more, all exemplify this ideal, translating mechanism-focused basic social psychology research and applying it to real-world intervention contexts. And over the course of the series, a diversity of backgrounds and perspectives will be represented as well. In addition to the colloquium talk, each of the speakers will be meeting with graduate students and faculty, and we have some funds earmarked for student-driven research projects in collaboration with the speakers lab. So this is really meant to be not only a model for how this work can be conducted, but also to really invite students into putting their toes for the first time into this kind of work when they're more used to basic research. So I'm going to keep things moving as quickly as possible, but I want to take at least a minute to introduce our first speaker. We are incredibly honored to have Robert Cialdini himself, our dear friend Bob, here to give the first talk. For those of you who don't know Bob, he is a Regents Professor Emeritus of both Psychology and Marketing here at ASU. He received his Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, going on to a doctoral degree at the University of North Carolina and postdoctoral work at Columbia University. His incredibly rich and influential body of research addresses social influence processes, including persuasion, compliance, and negotiation. According to Synapse, I discovered today that Bob is too cool for a Google Scholar profile, so I was sort of hunting around for this information. He has 186 publications, nearly 35,000 citations, and an H-index of 68. He was elected as a member of the National Academy of Sciences in 2019. His book, Influence, Science and Practice, has sold over 3 million copies and has been translated into more than 30 languages. His most recent book, Persuasion, A Revolutionary Way to Influence and Persuade, is a New York Times bestseller. He is president and CEO of the company Influence at Work. He advised on the campaigns of both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. His clients have included Google, Microsoft, IBM, AAA, Coca-Cola, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Prudential, the Mayo Clinic, the US Department of Justice, and NATO, among a number of others. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Bob for his talk now. I do want to mention really quickly that although the invitation specified ending at 4:30, that will not give us a lot of time for questions and answers. So we do invite you to stick around longer if you have questions, if you want to carry on the discussion a bit longer, we'll be here. So thanks again. Thank you, Bob, for being here. I'm so excited to hear your talk today.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be the kickoff speaker for the Leap Forward Colloquium series, as I think the idea for this series is really first rate. I have to say, though, I feel a little odd being in a guest role for a department that for so many years I've considered my home and still do consider my home. It's been a home that has both nurtured and furthered my work since the day I arrived as a boundlessly eager and clueless rookie. So I thought it would be appropriate to present today some of that work, which concerns the role of social norms messaging in bringing about pro-environmental action. And let's begin with a pair of contentions. The first is that decision makers can focus much too much on financial or regulatory devices when seeking to move people toward environmental goals. And uh, for example, the financial uh, uh, factors might be things as like price reductions or um, rebates. The regulatory factors might be such things as laws or restrictions or penalties. Um, but I think we can move beyond that to consider social psychological factors such as social norms as well. I don't mean to exclude financial or regulatory factors, just that they have costs, either monetary costs in the case of financial factors, or sometimes social costs in the case of regulatory factors. So social norms might give us a much less costly way to proceed. Let's begin by considering um, one of the most famous TV commercials of all time. It's a public service announcement that was very popular around the time that I first came to ASU and continued to be popular well into the 1990s. So successful, according to TV Guide magazine, that it was rated the 16th greatest TV commercial of all time. Not 16th greatest public service announcement of all time, but the greatest TV commercial of all time. Uh, it's the famous Iron Eyes Cody public service announcement, named after the actor who starred in it. It was it will show you it's a now iconic reaction of a stately buckskin clad Native American and his reaction to the pollution and littering all around him in the natural environment. Let me play that for you now.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it.
So, according to the Keep America Beautiful organization that developed that PSA, it is the single most effective communication against littering that has ever been submitted to the American public. But according to the focus theory of normative conduct that we developed here at ASU, there are features of it that are less than optimal and may even be negative in their impact. So let's think a little bit about what that formulation suggests. First of all, it suggests that there are two types of social norms, both of which influence human behavior, but maybe not by the same psychological processes. The first type is the descriptive norm, the norm of what people commonly do, what is normal for them, right? And those norms motivate us, they move us, they spur us into action by providing us evidence of what's likely to be effective and adaptive conduct. And that's because what most people do typically is effective and adaptive. Right? The second type of norm is injunctive social norms. These are norms not of what people commonly do, but what they commonly approve or disapprove, what they commonly respect or disrespect, what they commonly commend or scorn. Right? And there's a different sort of motivator behind those. It is the social sanctions, again, the approval and disapproval of others, right? That moves people in a particular direction, right? But interestingly, communicators often pit those two kinds of norms against one another in their messages. Take, for example, that Iron Eyes Cody public service announcement, in which there was injunctive information about disapproval for littering, the classic tear that rolled down the face of Iron Eyes Cody, that was in conflict with the descriptive norms of the situation. The fact that there was a lot of litter everywhere. People seemed to litter a lot. So you have these two norms operating in conflict with one another. Okay, so that's one aspect of this theoretical formulation. Here's another one. It's that which of the two norms that are likely to be most successful in moving us is the norm that is primarily focal in attention at the time of the decision to move in one direction or another, the norm that is most salient in consciousness, right? Okay. However, in most of the greater good-oriented messages we receive from public service-oriented communicators, they specify that we should move in a particular direction because of the injunctive norm, that it's bad to behave in this undesirable way. What's often underestimated is the usefulness of the other type of norm, descriptive norms, that function very powerfully for several reasons. First of all, they're primitive. They don't require much in the way of cognitive capacity. We see infrahumans, birds flock together, fish school together, cattle herd together, social insects swarm together in concert with one another. Right? So that's doesn't require, none of those organisms have a lot of cognitive capacity. It's not required for descriptive norms. You just have to perceive that a lot of others like you are moving in a particular direction, and you take your cue from that. Secondly, that's very powerful as a stimulus for behavior, producing large effects. The city of Louisville recently sent a letter to everyone who had been given a citation for a traffic violation in their city. Right? Everybody who got one of those letters. And in the letter, instead of just saying the usual information about paying and how long it took to pay, they added a sentence that said the majority of those people who receive violations pay their fee on time. It doubled traffic fine revenue immediately. Just knowing that this is what other people do, the descriptive norm had this big effect. Finally, descriptive norms operate stealthily, below the radar, and consequently don't produce reactance or rejection of the message, because people don't even recognize that they're being influenced by it. Okay, well, to explore the possibilities associated with this, I see that I'm very blurry here in this, so I don't know what just happened, but I'm kind of blurred out. But let's continue. And we started to explore this possibility by doing an experiment in a hospital parking garage, right? Parking structure, where we wanted to see if we could test this theory that we had, as well as the wisdom of the Keep America Beautiful organization's ad. Right? We did that by first focusing subjects who walked into the visitors floor of the parking garage after they had visited their friend or family member in the hospital, and went to their car. We manipulated the descriptive norm of the environment regarding littering by either littering the environment fully or by cleaning it fully. So they saw either a clean or a litter environment. We manipulated the salience or the focus of those individuals on the environment by having someone they passed drop a piece of litter into the environment, which always produced the same response. They would definitely shift their attention down to the floor and to the state of the environment. Now, let me show you what we predicted that we would get littering according to the dominant descriptive norm, depending on whether their attention was drawn to it, our subject's attention was drawn to it. Let me show you what happened with the littered environment, just as we would expect. In a littered environment, under conditions of high salience, when somebody littered into it, we got a lot more littering than when there was no norm salience, when this other person simply walked by our participants. But you know what? You could explain that in terms of a simple modeling account. You see somebody litter, some unpunished model perform a behavior. Just by general modeling formulations, you're likely to get more littering. But that wouldn't be the case, that modeling explanation, in the case of the clean environment, where when somebody littered into a clean environment, we got less littering, the opposite of what you would predict in from a modeling account, but consistent with the idea that whichever norm was made focal in consciousness, made salient, that was the norm that would become predominant and guide behavior as a consequence. Okay. So what I did in this situation was take these data, analyze them, and send a copy of them to the national director of the Keep America Beautiful organization. I said to him in the letter, look, we got these data, and the data that are most similar to what you did in your ionized Cody ad that showed somebody littering into a littered environment. Remember that fast food bag that was thrown from the car and splattered at the moccasin-clad feet of the actor? That produced the most littering in our experiment. We think you might want to take the counsel of our study and make a small research-based adjustment to that PSA. If you ever run it again, instead of having that car throw the bag out into a littered environment, that car should throw the bag into a pristine environment. And by our research, that should produce the least littering. Remember that finding? That produced the least litter. So I sent off the letter and got no response. I figured, well, maybe I didn't get it to the right person. So I sent that letter to everybody on the Keep America Beautiful board of directors. No response. But it turns out I had a friend, the director of the Phoenix Keep America Beautiful organization. right, who was on the board. And I asked her, so did my letter ever come up? She said, oh yes, it came up. Well, what did the director say? He said, who does this guy think he is? Really? Who does he think he is? We've been doing this for 25 years. He does one experiment in Arizona and he thinks he knows more than we do? Dismissed this. And he just essentially gave it the back of the hand, right? In fact, they did more than dismiss it. They then ran another version of the Iron-Eyes Cody ad that was worse in terms of what we had suggested. So not only did they ignore the research, they defied it. Right? Well, here's their big mistake. In addition to the mistake of failing to take the counsel of any research conducted by members of Arizona State's psychology department, that's one kind of mistake they made. There's a more general one, and it has to do with the idea that listed on the slide there, that to mobilize corrective action against a social problem that's larger growing, public service communicators often decry it as regrettably frequent. They do that for all of those activities there on the slide for drinking and driving, teen suicide, voter apathy, and harming the environment, among others. All right. And here's the big mistake. Within the lament, look at all these people who are doing this regrettable thing, lives the counterproductive, normative message, look at all the people who are doing it. Right? So we decided to conduct a study to provide some evidence for our contention that this was a mistake on their part. It was a study done at the National Petrified Forest here in Arizona, not far from Holbrook, right? Where if you've ever been there, you've seen scenes like this. This is a visitor's trail where you can see not only big logs, but also alongside of them, small shards and crystal of petrified wood there, right? Not only does the park receive nearly 1 million visitors like this set who take pictures of these artifacts, they also steal. They take the wood, not just the pictures of the wood, they take the wood home as souvenirs. It's such a problem that the officials, the directors of the park, decided to erect a large sign at the entrance to the park so everyone could see this problem. And here's what the sign said. Right? Your heritage is being vandalized every day by theft, loss of petrified wood of 14 tons a year, mostly a small piece at a time. Right? This sign actually was the reason we decided to run our study at the park. At the time, one of my graduate students, great guy, Kelton Rhodes, was coming to work with me after working in an advertising agency in Los Angeles. Right? And with his fiance, they decided to stop at the Petrified Forest. Right? Kelton describes his fiance, now his wife, as the most honest person he's ever met in his life. She's never borrowed a paper clip or a rubber band that she's failed to return. Right? And he says they were standing outside the park entrance looking at this sign, and before he had finished reading it, he felt her elbow in his ribs, and she said something he never suspected she would say. we'd better get ours too. What was it about that sign that could have turned an eminently, characteristically honest individual into an environmental thief who's going to deplete a national treasure in the process? It must have been something strong. It must have been something powerful. And if you look at that message, it's clear what it is. The descriptive norm was that everybody steals here. A lot of people steal anyway, was the norm, right? So what you have is a conflict between the disapproval, don't do this, it's the bad thing to do, and yet the frequency at which it is described as occurring. So we decided to test that study, that idea that this was a mistake, by running an experiment there at the park. We went to certain paths that were heavily trafficked, and we planted pieces of petrified wood along those paths, right? So that when we came back, we could see how many of the pieces of wood that we had put there had been stolen. And in front of some of the paths, we put signs that were similar to the signs of the entrance, telling people that a lot of other individuals are doing it, and even showing a group of people stealing wood, right? Another set of paths had a different sign. It also admonished people not to steal, but showed only one person, not a group, not everybody doing it, but a loner, a singleton taking wood, right? Let me show you what the results were. First of all, we can see what the percentage of theft was when there was no sign associated with these paths. It was about 2.9%, 3% of the people who we counted going down those paths stole a piece of wood. Right? If there was a sign urging against theft, but showing 3 people doing it, we almost tripled theft. Now, if there was a sign that showed not a lot of people, but only a single person doing it, we nearly halved thefts, right? Okay. What do we conclude from this?
Bob?
Yes.
So sorry, we can't see your slides right now. Can you turn them back on again for us?
Yes. Okay,
Great.
I'm going to go back and do that. We go from here. Here's here. Can you see them now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Here's the no sign condition. Here's the 3 thieves condition. And here's the lone thief condition. Right? Just as we hoped would occur. Now, here's the conclusion, that it may well be the case that it makes sense to describe a problem that is as severe and widespread or undesirable when we're seeking financing from potential funders in order to tackle the problem. But it's a mistake to try to do so, to communicate that message to citizens, to people who you're trying to get to reduce the problem, right? Because in so doing, in presenting that message, we normalize, we legitimize that undesirable activity, right? Now, although I still believe that that this conclusion we came to is the correct one, I did make a mistake in getting that conclusion implemented, right? When we brought our results to the park managers, they spent a little time with our findings and then decided not to change their signage one bit. Why? When we asked them, here's what they said. Well, we decided to do a little experiment of our own. We sent some of our rangers out to ask guests, visitors, and we asked them, if you knew a lot of people were stealing wood from the forest floor, would that make you more likely or less likely to do this yourself? And they all said, well, that would make us less likely to do it. So we realized that your study was wrong. Now, I don't know what to say about that. At first, I thought, oh, it must be some mistake having to do with a lack of understanding of what constitutes good evidence. Right? I don't believe that anymore. Here's what I believe. Right? It's important for environmental researchers who intend for their findings to be incorporated into environmental programs or policy of one sort or another, to bring program developers into the research process from the beginning. In other words, what we were showing those individuals was that those signs that they were responsible for, right, were not only ineffective in reducing theft, they were increasing thefts, and they didn't want to hear that. They were complicit in those signs. So without those early interactions, researchers are unlikely to give us the valuable perspectives that they might have, and very much unlikely to give us the buy-in we need to get our research implemented in naturally occurring applied settings like this one. In other words, complicity is king. We have to make the people we're working for in those settings complicit in the research process, which allows them to be complicit then in any corrective to the mistakes that may have been made. Right? So we decided to see if we could implement this recognition by doing yet another study. This was a study in which we developed pro-recycling public service announcements in conjunction with the personnel of the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality at the time, right? And we wanted them to be part of this research project from the outset. And here are the ways that we asked them to be part of that project. We asked them to consult us on settings, to get the TV stations where those ads were going to be aired, asked them to put their authority behind that, and also to select the towns and cities in which we were going to play these ads, right? Now, there were two components of the ads, or excuse me, there was the content of the ad, there were two of them, conveyed the following message to recipients. I'm going to play the ads for you in a minute, right? First of all, that the desired activity of recycling was widely performed and widely approved by Arizona residents. And secondly, the unwanted activity of failing to recycle was rare and roundly disapproved by Arizona residents. Right? So let me show you what those ads looked like. Here's the first.
Clem, where'd you put the recycle bin?
Recycle bin? Just use this here trash barrel.
Clement, you ignorant fool. That there soda can ain't trash. Lots of important things come from stuff we recycle, like Red's cup, and Luke's long underwear, and this here hanging robe.
Oh, heck, fellers, I was just a-funnin'.
Okay, so I think you can see both the disapproval, the hanging rope, and the widespread favoritism for recycling there. Here's the second.
Over here, Mrs. Rodriguez. It's our week to take the recycling down to the center. Gee, Dad, where's Mr. Jenkins?
Well, son, you see, Mr. Jenkins doesn't recycle.
An homage to the Ironized Cody PSA. Notice also at the end of the ad, there was a crowd of faces in the shape of the state of Arizona to once again instantiate the perception that what recycling is what we do here and it's what we approve here. Now, let's take a look at the outcomes. Right. The first outcome was that tonnage in those, recycling tonnage in those cities that saw that ad versus a control set of matched cities that didn't get to see the ad exceeded the control communities by 24%. Now, I don't know how much you know about public service announcements, but if you can get 1 to 2% deflection of behavior as a result of a PSA, that's considered a success. We got 24%. Even though, as you could tell from those PSAs, they were structured on a shoestring. We got actors from the ASU theater department. We got borrowed cameras, and we did this. We scripted it all ourselves. This was not high production value PSAs, right? The typical PSA that has high production value gets 1 to 2%. They have production value. We had the science behind us, and we got 24% deflection in behavior. All right. Now, here's another outcome. That set of public service announcements was promoted and distributed for well over a decade by the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality staffers who we worked with, who we brought into the process from their formative stages and who had collaborated with us. Right? And those ads kept being played until the last of those individuals left the agency. Isn't that telling? Right? When their complicity was at stake in not the mistake in this instance, which they had made previously, let's be honest, they were using other public service announcements. When they were complicit in the corrective, they fought furiously to keep those successful ads on the air. As soon as they were gone, now there's another set of people in there who weren't complicit in it, weren't involved in it, and so they didn't have a personal stake in keeping those ads running. Okay. Now, we then decided to do a mediational study, right? To determine whether, first of all, our public service announcements did have the intended effect of conveying to viewers both that our state's residents felt that recycling was approved and that our residents did in fact recycle, right? The injunctive and descriptive norms, right? Secondly, whether those norms influence subjects' intentions to recycle. And finally, whether those two types of norms operated similarly or in a different fashion to create these or to influence these recycling intentions. Now, in this study, we didn't need to, it was a mediational study. We didn't need to go into people's homes. We showed those PSAs to Arizona State University students in the introductory psychology classes. And we asked them various questions, including what was their likely intention to recycle after viewing the ad. So let me show you what we found, right? First of all, prior attitude toward recycling did predict intention to recycle. If that hadn't happened, we would have been very worried about our findings, but it was just what you would expect. It was also the case that we thought other aspects of the ads, like whether they were funny, whether they were informative, would influence people's intention through the perception that the ads were persuasive. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. Those people who thought the ads were funny, right, and thought they were informative, also thought they were more persuasive. And that persuasiveness, the strength of those arguments, then led to intentions to recycle. But what are those two other factors? The injunctive norm, which has to do with approval of littering, right? It also significantly affected persuasiveness of the ads, perceived persuasiveness of the ads. And then what about the descriptive norm? It had a direct effect on intention to recycle. It wasn't mediated through persuasiveness. Remember what we were saying about descriptive norms, what a lot of other people are doing. They fly under the radar. They don't need us to have cognitions about the strength of the argument or to deliberate in any considered way about argument strength. They just have the effect automatically. Okay. So here's the next question. If indeed, as we were able to demonstrate, when we are able to align descriptive and injunctive norms with one another, so they're both moving people in the same direction, we get very powerful and favorable results from the standpoint of pro-environmental action, right? But how can we scale that in a national way? So it's not just here in Arizona for a short time when Department of Environmental Quality staffers are still around. What could we do that's more lasting and has a larger impact? Well, one possibility would be to engage the private sector in this process. In this instance, I didn't go looking for a partner in the private sector. They came to me. One day there was a knock on my door during my office hours, and two guys came in, two young guys. They were they were a couple of individuals who had a startup company that they wanted to employ to get people to use less energy in their homes, right? And they had seen our research because the research had been funded by the Hewlett Foundation in the Bay Area. And these two guys were situated in the Bay Area. And they went to the Hewlett Foundation and said, is there any information that you have that might help us with this startup that we're imagining? And they showed them our report, which showed the research I've been telling you about. So they came to my office unannounced. They just show up during my office hours. Good thing I was conscientious about my office hours in those days. And so they show up, and they wanted me to join their company. I said, no, I'm not going to join your company, but here's what I will do. I'll agree to be the chief science officer of your company, which was called O Power at the time, and help you design the messaging process. And they wanted to use reports that they would send to the customers of power companies, utilities, right, that compared the customers' amount of energy consumption in any one month with that of those around them in comparable homes, their neighbors, people like them. What are the people around them doing, right? So they would compare those usage levels with their neighbors. And we wound up sending them, let me give you a bigger shot of that, right? Reports like this. Some of you may have actually experienced these in various cities that you've lived in, because this company has now grown to over 100 utility company employees in the last 10 years. And customers get a message like this once a month that describes how they are doing relative to their neighbors, the descriptive norms, what their neighbors are doing all around you, like you. And then there's an injunctive norm where they get a little smiley face of approval if they're doing better than their average neighbors. Right? The results in the last 10 years have been simply remarkable. As last count, and this was a year ago, so these numbers are actually understated. At last count, these reports have saved more than 36 billion pounds of carbon dioxide emissions from entering the environment. They've saved more than 23 trillion watts per hour of electricity from being expended. And they're presently generating every year $700 million in bill savings to utility companies. Right? Now, I began this talk saying that when I first arrived, right, let's do this. I was clueless about what the future would bring here for me at ASU. But I did know that after I retired, I wanted to be able to look back and smile. And I can say that this program of work has allowed me to widen that smile. Importantly, I also want to acknowledge the ASU Psych Department collaborators with me on the work that made it possible and made it better. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your kind attention and be happy to address any questions you might have at this point of me. Thank you. And we're still blurred out, but maybe that's not bad at my
It
age.
fades in and out. It's okay. It'll come and go. Bob, thank you so much. I cannot begin to thank you enough for that absolutely fantastic talk. I know in this format, you can't hear everybody applauding, which is so frustrating. So what I'd love to do is actually encourage all of you to take a moment and shoot Bob an email. Just letting him know. That was because it's one way that we can communicate in the absence of the thunderous applause that I know you'd be hearing right now if we were all in the colloquium room together. I'm not even sure we could fit all of us in the colloquium room together right now, but were we to do that, you would be hearing overwhelming applause. So in lieu of that, can I invite everyone who's here right now to send Bob an email thanking him for his talk. But beyond that, I'd love to encourage questions at any time. Just go ahead and mute yourself. If you would prefer to type a question into the chat, I'm happy to ask it on your behalf, but we can also just take turns unmuting to ask any questions that you may have.
So Bob, this is Delia. I have a question, and it may stray from the boundaries of the topic here, but you've just gotten me thinking so much. On the issues that you described around environment and environment more generally, people will tend to be supportive outside of the costs that are involved or whatever sacrifices they make, but they're generally supportive of keeping the environment clean. And so as I was sitting here thinking, how do we promote equity? How do we reduce racism? You know, all these oppressive types of patterns that are very prevalent, I guess, as a descriptor, but maybe not a good thing to do. So when there's a motive, that is, there's a commitment to an ideology of difference across race or gender or social class, is there a way to leverage this combination of descriptive and injunctive to begin to create change in a positive direction? I can certainly imagine saying, you know, younger generations are much better at navigating difference and they're better at promoting equity, blah, blah, blah. But it really, because it's systemic, there's a lot of resistance there from people who have either gained from the systems that we have in place or who are so entrenched in their belief system. Do you have any wisdom at all to share in that arena?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest something that, in effect, that we find within persuasion science. It's the convert communicator, the person who used to believe what the problematic core of individuals within a particular subgroup now believe, but changed because something happened that convinced this individual's mind. And so when you have that person doing this, right, you give that person voice, right, who says, I'm doing it differently now, but you can't reject me as somebody who's not of you. I'm of you. In fact, a while ago, I believed exactly what you believe. It's not just I'm the black sheep down the street who doesn't believe what everybody else does, right, on this topic. I believed it too. And then I saw, so for example, we can do this now with vaccine hesitancy and the people who aren't taking it because they were afraid of side effects, or they felt that they're being made scapegoats or guinea pigs, right? This kind of thing. You have somebody from within their group who says, that's what I used to believe, but here's what I believe now, and then explains the reason for it. So the action is the descriptive norm, right? What other people are doing. The reason is the injunctive norm, because it's the right thing to do, because I realized that not getting that vaccine jeopardized my family and my grandmother died, or something like that combines those two. And I'm going to suggest one other thing that we've done with people at Arizona State University, right? And that is when you give evidence of people who are doing something other than you are doing, right? It's not enough to just give a statistic. 60% of people are getting vaccinated, right? Give them a trend. Give them a trend. The research we've been involved with, also at other universities, shows that people project the trajectory of the trend to continue. So it supercharges the descriptive norm. Not only are they do they see 60%, they project 70%. They project 75%. So now you're getting not just existing descriptive norm, you're getting future descriptive norm operating on them.
Right.
Here's the key from that research. So if we said, let's say, back in June, so let's say right now, 60% of people want to get vaccinated, right? That's that one statistic, that one data point, that's a statistic. If you say back in November, that was 40%.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
2 data points are a difference.
Right.
That's good.
Mhm.
But if you say in December it was 40%, and in January it was 50%, and today it's 60%,
Right.
3 data points are a trend.
Okay. That's very good. And in fact, in a town hall that I participated in for ABC this week, it was on hidden bias in good people. I did give, more and more people are recognizing that bias is there and that we need to be intentional, et cetera, et cetera. But man, some of the chat items that came in, there's a lot of people who just do not believe in science. And but this is something to work out.
Well, you know what? There's an interesting study that shows that if experts tell people who resist science that science is good, like it has no impact on them.
Right.
But if George Clooney tells them, they do.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
Because they're making that decision not on a logical basis.
Right.
They're making it on an emotional basis, a belief-based
Absolutely.
rationale.
Right.
So if you're going to affect emotional reactions, you have to have an emotional
Right.
message, one given by somebody they like. There's a guy named Jeremy Butler, his name was. He said, you will never, now this is back in the 1700s, so it's sexist language, but he said, you'll never reason a man out of a position he was not reasoned into
Right.
in the
Right.
first place.
Right.
All right. We have a question from Kendon Jung, and then up to bat after that is Erica Pages.
Howdy. First of all, thank you for your talk today. When I first started at ASU, your name along with Dr. Doug Mackenzie Moore both popped up as areas in influencing behavior that really got me excited about my work. To preface my question, I work as a program manager here at ASU in the Zero Waste Department. I'm also a doctorate student in the Design College, looking at how we create environments that produce sustainable lifestyles. And I'm in the advanced social marketing and social psychology class right now. So this is my space, I love it. My question to you is, in some of the examples that you gave, with the example of the television ads and the place-based messaging with the petrified forest, that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, those, the application of those messages are kind of fixed in space. So the signs, they don't move around, right? They're in a single space. Or the televisions or the utility ads, those folks aren't moving. The message is going to them and is contextual to their to that environment. With the recent trend in millennials and Gen Zs, most of their media is being consumed through mobile devices. And so I was curious if there was any perspective you've had in terms of that change in the generation, that we could continue to use your descriptive norms, using trends instead of statistics. How do we take that information and apply it onto a very, what I like to call transient group, where they don't yet have roots somewhere, that type of previous messaging and the success it used to have. I hope it made sense.
Well, I'm not sure I know what you mean by not having a place. They have a place to live, I would expect, right?
But they're not staying there as long as previous generations. Mm-hmm.
Sure, but how much energy they use in any given month is still going to be relevant to them because they pay utility bills, probably. And what has been the case is that Power, which has evolved, they now have a mobile phone app for getting the information about where you live and how much you used relative to your neighbors. They also have smart meters, smart devices in the home where people can see how much they're using and so on. I don't think I see there anything more than a logistic problem that can be solved, right? With this difference between some of the data that we collected and the kind of situation that you're describing. I think it's possible to project that information onto mobile devices. As people are moving through their day, they can still get that information. And even if they're transient and move frequently, they still have a piece of information relevant to their current situation.
Thank you.
Right, Erica, and then next up is Steve Newberg.
Okay. Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for the lovely talk. I've always appreciated the talks you've given to the students and all the advice over the years. So this was a lovely talk. I'm wondering about the phenomenon that's been happening in recent years due to maybe the rise of the internet and mass communication, that there are smaller groups with louder voices, more anger online, more media attention, that seem to be determining what the group at large decides is normative, even if it isn't. So I'm just wondering what your perspective is on how we begin to tackle this issue between what is normative and what loud voices on the internet determine is normative, and how to combat that.
Well, again, I think we have to be more than simply passive in it. We have to counterattack. We have to provide counter information, not just about the content of the message, but about the norms associated with how many people believe that message versus how many don't. Right? That's the key. If people see these individuals as the minority, then we've marginalized them. If we allow them by virtue of the volume, of their messages to carry the day, then the norm is being misaligned with reality. So I think the key is always to be sure that we comment in those cases about the extent to which this is a minority view, right? And we normalize the majority view.
Okay, thanks.
Steve?
So yeah. Hi, Bob. So I want to riff off of Kendon's question and sort of my understanding of it, which may have been a little bit different. So traditionally, we can think about foundations for norms because people were relatively mobile, relatively stationary. You had same people around you, sometimes generations. A lot of it would have been familial and the like. But if you now think about folks that move around a lot more, if you think about really fragmented communication networks via social media and the like, right, where people don't have, in some ways, a broader sense, is there something that sort of goes beyond sort of the technical fix that you sort of talked about related to, where the information about your neighborhood could follow you, but is there something sort of potentially deeper there conceptually about whether people actually still view themselves in the same kind of way as having neighbors, as having stable, foundations for consistent norms, or rather, normative sources, right? Sources for norms that maybe in fact aren't as stable as they were. And under those circumstances, is there something that comes in? Is there a way of thinking about mobile descriptions or how do I want to say the notion that norms and injunctive norms don't exist in as clear of a way and not as communicated clearly to me, the sources of what's going to count for someone who can in fact leverage upon me some kind of injunction may in fact not be as stable. So I'm wondering whether Kendon's question was about differences in how millennials sort of think about groups and the collectives and the mobility and the instability of those collectives in the kind of way that may be a more fundamental question about how we ought to be thinking about norms and influence.
Well, I think that way may well be the case, but I think the way to handle it is something that the internet gives us, and that is interest groups and chat rooms and so on, where people go there intentionally to be with others who share a perspective or share an interest in something. That's the place that we can target with those messages, because people have, by definition, defined themselves as in that network. This is who I belong to. And the research is really very clear that it's those who are comparable to us that we find as our normative standards. It's not people in general. In fact, if they're people from another team or another class or something like that, we often don't respond positively. So we can take the lead of those people and make sure that the information is occurring and has relevance for the interest group. We do our survey within them to find what the norm is.
Can I follow up then real quickly? But one of the features of these groups is a lack of normative heterogeneity, right? So what you really would need then under those circumstances is your convert strategy, right? Someone who's been within that group, is credible within that group, who then, because you're not going to have that heterogeneity typically because people are so focusing, their presence in groups to places which by choice, in fact, aren't heterogeneous in those ways. So the convert strategy would seem to be especially important, maybe now compared to before, where there existed more of a natural heterogeneity anyway.
I think that's right.
Other questions? All right. Well, we're a little bit beyond time, but Bob, thank you so much. That was really amazing. And I'm so glad to see everybody here. This was an absolutely phenomenal start to what we hope will be a long series. Bob, I hope you might be able to attend some of the other ones. I know that our speakers would be thrilled to see you there.
Yes, I certainly intend to do that.
Our next speaker is going to be Jack Glazer on April 8th. Same time, same Thursday colloquium time. Jack is a professor of public policy at UC Berkeley, and his work examines implications of and interventions in bias and policing. So looking forward to that. Hope to see you there. Hope y'all get through March. It's it's kind of a crazy month and we're all missing spring break right about now. But hang in there. The end of the semester is not too far away. And thank you again, Bob. This is just delightful.
Can I ask Bob if you're willing, I'm sorry, to stay for just a couple of minutes, and maybe the students as well. So Bob, when you think about, so Bob's known for full cycle psychology. If you think about full cycle Cialdini, if you had to leave, you know, we've got tons of students in this room right now. If you had to leave them with one piece of advice, right, about pursuing, you know, maybe not just the graduate career, but sort of the life beyond and the connection to it, what would you offer them?
Well, it's an interesting question because Doug Kenrick asked me that question about a year ago. He was thinking about how to provide advice for his son, right? And then it morphed into a book. I think he's writing on advice. But here's what I said, all right, for life advice, one piece of life advice. When you go into a new situation, expect the best from the people you find there, because that will have two consequences, right? And now I'm not talking about situations where there are people there that you know that they're not honest or they're not trustworthy. But you go into a new situation, anticipate the best from them, right? For two reasons. One is they will, by the rule of reciprocity, likely to reciprocate that and expect the best from you. Secondly, they will like you more for expecting the best because it will allow you to be generous with them. If you expect the best, it allows you to be generous with them, which they're likely to reciprocate and also like because you've given them something, right? And now you're interacting with people who you like and they like you, and that's a good place. That's a good platform for from which to move ahead. All right, kind of a broad question and a broad answer, but yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for staying extra, and again, thanks, Bob.
All right.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good rest of the week.
So different Kenrick son, you know, for that particular set of questions, Dave?
Actually, I think, yeah, so the book I think is actually for Liam, although I do remember Bob saying that, and I've actually used that. I've followed that advice since then, and that's actually really very good advice. So
it is good advice.
Yeah. So
from my line of research, we'd call